Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jamie Barassa and I'm going to be your moderator today for the session called Increasing Resiliency as Edge Becomes an Innovation Driver. Today, I'm lucky to have two great people with me, Jennifer Cook and Dave McCarthy from IDC. Dave, can you give me a quick introduction?
Yeah, certainly. So I am a research vice president at IDC inside of the worldwide infrastructure practice. And so I cover both cloud and edge technology and how both work together to solve innovative business problems.
And Jen?
Bonjour. This is Jennifer Cook, Research Director at IDC and the Edge Strategies Program, and I've spent a lot of time looking at data centers and equipment outside of data centers, and happy to be with you here today. Thank you.
Great. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to do a little bit of a mashup. We're going to leverage some of the knowledge that you guys have gained in engaging with customers and completing researches about edge computing, and a little bit of the experience I have in engaging with customers here at Schneider Electric as they go down the journey of deploying use cases that require edge infrastructure. So without too much introduction, let's jump right in. The topic is edge computing, and edge computing is really about distributed IT infrastructure. As you guys think through the research that you guys have been doing, are you guys seeing any challenges that kind of just keep repeating themselves for customers who are becoming more reliant on distributed technology at the edge?
Yes, we are. Actually, IDC has done a lot of survey work in this area and interviewed a lot of people at different areas of the edge journey. What we have found is that now that organizations are a little bit further along, have a little more experience, they are bumping into problems they never anticipated that they would have. Many of these are kind of the intersection of the physical world and the virtual world, where IT people are running into issues with power, something that they took for granted before. They're running into issues with people who are not authorized, interacting with, which could be plugging or unplugging, or trying to fix something and actually creating a new problem. Many situations that IT never thought that they would be experiencing. And IDC has actually been surprised to understand exactly how frequently this is happening. We've had, 1 in 4 organizations reporting that people are interacting with systems when they're not supposed to. Many are having problems with utility power and, situations that they never had to deal with before when equipment was safely nestled inside data centers.
Now, you used a couple of words in there that are key: physical world. And Schneider Electric, we create a lot of that physical world. The reality is that is, necessarily automation of a warehouse or, a digital system inside a retail store. We don't create those use cases, but we do create the physical infrastructure that those use cases sit on top of. Have you guys seen anything unique about how customers really need to think through this physical layer in driving resiliency?
Yeah, I think this really speaks to the standardization side of things, because when you look at how to build out an edge solution and what might have existed in a lot of these OT environments, there's a huge amount of diversity in power types, in physical structures, in how things are connected together. And a lot of that was born out of the history, the decades that some of these things came to be. And so when you look at something like an IT-OT convergence concept, where now you're bringing more standardized approaches that you might have found in the data center, but then extending them out into these remote locations, you do get to have a better way of creating both that resiliency that you mentioned, as well as a better ability to do some remote management, because now what you're doing is you're not treating data in a silo, but you're looking about how you can take data from multiple systems and use that data to understand what might be happening in the environment.
Sure. We do see a good number of our customers looking at both of those elements, standardization and looking at how they actually drive a more resilient infrastructure through the fact that those things are connected and digitized with remote management and monitoring.
So being able to monitor and understand, what conditions are happening, and not just simple monitoring, but really understanding like when you see one or two alarms, are those false alarms or are those serious alarms? Like how do you assign severity to it? And are there things that you could self-remediate remotely as part of that? And a lot of this really builds on, being able to have standards that integrate a lot of the data that you might be getting at the edge from these physical locations back into existing systems, because, ultimately you want to be able to create a whole workflow around a potential incident and how do you assign a tech and how do you remediate that. And so all of that I think fits into the picture.
So, Dave, that's a great answer. And we really do see that as I've engaged with customers over the last few years. I do see two common themes. One is in the ability to standardize things, and the other is this question about remote management and monitoring. And it's been really interesting to see how those two are really the topics in which our customers keep asking about.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important is that when you look at edge deployments, it is definitely not a one size fits all sort of situations. Like different companies are looking for different types of solutions. And a few months ago, you took us through Schneider's flexible approach to manage power services. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and so what we're seeing is that customers are really trying to build business cases, right? At the end of the day, technology is being deployed because they're trying to either deliver a promise that they've made to their customers, or they're trying to deliver a product. That product might be, surgery that's using a robot to actually complete the surgery, or it might be a physical good in which, IoT has been deployed on a factory line, and they need to make sure that 1,000 units come off that line every day. But in either case, the need for them to be able to create that value stems from a business case. And what customers are coming to us and saying is they can justify very quickly the cost of the software and even the hardware to do so. But because of the remote nature, they're struggling to figure out how do they cost effectively drive, what are the key elements that are there, and how do we leverage the power? All these things are connected, not just servers and storage gear is connected, but our UPSs, our power distribution units are connected. And we're finding that the data that comes off of those can actually aid in a lot of predictability and be able to help avoid issues before they actually occur. When you think through kind of the role of monitoring and remote management, where do you see customers taking that, especially customers who have really highly distributed geographic installations?
I would say, especially with COVID, absolutely, customers are relying a lot more on the remote management. And it was something that, organizations had thought about, this is maybe something I should investigate, but they were forced to during COVID. And I think now many organizations are actually seeing it as a way to save a lot on costs and just working smarter instead of working harder. The sheer logistics and difficulty of having the right people with the right skills, with the parts in the right place at the right time. There's just too many factors that need to come together to make it all happen. And they're seeing this really as a way to be very efficient in their operations, where they're strained in many other areas, working on day-to-day things, anything that they can do to make the future a little bit more predictable, and budgeting for services is something that the reliability and predictability and is something that's become very important.
And we've kind of zoomed right down into the fact that things are remote and you got to manage it through a managed service partner, and pairing that with response capabilities to actually go out and fix something that's broken while ensuring they don't have any downtime. And so our Edge software and services suite was really designed specifically to enable that flexibility, whether the customer wants to do it, they want the partner to do it, they want Schneider to do it, in the two vectors of monitoring and management. One of the conversations that you and I have had in the past, Dave, really started to focus in on the unique nature of, are there different types of management practices out there? Why don't you recap what you have told me before about the different models that you start to see in the marketplace?
Well, certainly, you could probably break this down into a few different ones. I mean, there still are people that want to make the investments and do a self-managed solution, and in those cases, they'll be buying standardized parts and doing the deployment and the management and the as you say, the sort of the life cycle of it. But more and more, we see people looking towards a managed services approach, whether that's a shared managed services where they handle some of the incident, let's say, and they look to a vendor or supplier to handle others, or in some cases, fully managed, where it really becomes the easy button for them, where they sort of turn over control of that. And that's so important when you start thinking about that, that innovation driver and real-time mission critical operations where, it's 24/7, right? And you want to make sure that, that there's somebody actively monitoring that at all time and looking at ways of being proactive in terms of remediation. All of that, I think, plays into it.
Yeah. Now, when we kind of look through this, there's lots of different applications out there. Do we have consistency in terms of how technology is actually deployed, even if the use cases are varying?
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more. I mean, now I think you can look at the way to build out your edge solution as standardized building blocks. And, the reality is there's still going to be different types of edge locations. Some are going to be indoor and controlled environments. Some are going to be outdoor and harsh environments. But the structure that you use, the underlying, hardware components and software stacks that live on top of that are becoming more and more standardized. And that's really important when we talk about that earlier concept of, where does the cloud and the edge fit together? Every time you bring up a new concept, everybody says, "Oh, is that the old thing and this is the new thing?" And we couldn't say more strongly that these are complements.
Yeah.
And when you get to, I think, how enterprises and other organizations are looking at this, edge computing is a way for them to avoid some of the compromises that they might have had to do with a centralized computing model. And so you actually see companies now looking at, like, where's the best place to put this versus, like, where can I put it, right? It becomes, these kind of environments now really becoming ubiquitous and tying that together under standardized approaches.
Now, Jen, you kind of have a unique perspective. I know over the last few years, you've been one of the key data center analysts there at IDC. Now you're over here on the edge side, looking at more distributed spaces. As you start to think through, are you seeing any practices that were really concentrated in the data center operations side being adopted to solve some of the challenges in the edge in distributed edge spaces?
What I am really seeing is that things that seem like nice to have in the data center space are absolutely critical, where you need the ability to monitor, get telemetry on everything that's happening, where you might rely on a person to do that in the centralized data center, or you have that safety net. You don't have any safety net out at the edge. And as the edge is becoming more and more mission critical, again, it's, these aren't nice to have compute instances. These are the lifeblood of your business, often, ranging from everything from, as we had talked about, in hospitals, where it's a life or death situation, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it might be, smoothing the workflow at the drive-through line of our local fast food restaurant.
But as you think through, a lot of the digitization 10 years ago were enablers to business, and they could deal with delays. If the server is down for an email for a few hours, all right, so people don't do emails. They still have their phone. They still can do all the other work they have. But what customers are describing to me today is this use case that's actually embedded. And if you think about something like a robotic surgery or a logistics center that relies on robots to move packages around, and all of a sudden that robot's down for an hour, that means there's no surgery. Well, that's how hospitals are billing out their time, or that means no boxes are being filled and being sent out. That means the commitment that company has made isn't being delivered. And so there seems to be this change in how value is seen and the importance of downtime.
Right. It's mission critical, and therefore, the tools to make sure everything's operating smoothly also become, much more mission critical. And what we're seeing too is that a lot of times organizations are, able to put their best practices and more of the transformative technologies within the edge. And I think actually a lot of the great things that are happening at the edge will end up influencing the core data centers in the near future.
We kind of talked through a couple of things. We've now talked about a few industries. We've talked about healthcare, retail. You just brought up an example of restaurants there. Are we seeing any variances in industry or geography?
Well, I can tell you from an industry perspective, edge is one of those things that's good for everybody, I guess, is one way to say it. I mean, it adds value. And some of this, I think, goes to what we were saying a few minutes ago of, over the last 10 years, you saw a lot of centralization, the move to the public cloud and or data center consolidation. So all of a sudden you have to ask yourself, like, why all of a sudden is this happening? Like, why is the edge now cropping back up? And it's for some of the reasons that Jennifer mentioned. It's also, when you look at an organization like a manufacturing company that has a lot of real-time processes, those also, whether for safety scenarios or whether it's things like optimizing, the identification of defects or optimizing a production line. I mean, those are applications and workloads that just don't work well in a cloud environment, at least in a public cloud environment where you have that round trip that just takes too long, right? So whether it's, that low latency real-time application, whether it's just, data that's being generated in large volumes that just isn't efficient to transfer over communication lines. But then the other one, I think, and it also fits into your Chick-fil-A example, is back to that resilience, right? I mean, the truth is every major public cloud provider has had a major outage over the last year, and there's always that potential for a backhoe down the street to dig up your fiber optic line. So, the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you build business continuity in an environment where something is out to get you, right? And so edge is also not just for those real-time cases, but also being looked at as a way of being able to manage that potential downtime. And so any industry, you can almost divide them into buckets, right? There's like the real-time industries that need edge for that reason. I think there's also just these other sort of distributed nature of things like retail that benefit from that sort of local residency of data. These are all places where you see edge being important today.
Yeah, as I think through that, we do kind of see something similar. And you talked a little bit in that answer about commonalities. Obviously use cases, there's hundreds, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of use cases. Everybody can create a slight variation and create a new use case just tomorrow. But if we kind of come down a layer and we start to think through how the architecture is built, how much variance really does exist from one use case to another, when we're talking about servers and storage and network here?
Well, the good part is all of this is based on standard technology, or is more and more, right? I mean, I think this is also, there's a couple of trends, I think, that are all happening at the same time, right? There's this push of more computing to the edge. It's also being coupled with this convergence between IT and OT technologies. IT representing more of that standardized approach of bringing in, sort of things, which is in some cases different than the OT world that had very vertically specialized kind of equipment and even the applications that run. And I think what's nice about what I'm seeing about these trends is, OT is now allowing some of these IT-like technologies to come in such that you're absolutely right. You can use like standard units of compute and other standard building blocks to, sort of build out the capacity that you need, depending on your requirements and the associated resiliency that goes with that capacity, to address a multitude of workloads. And so, I think, just circling back also to the question about, we talked about sort of different, industries where this is happening, but, we also look at this globally as well. And right now, when we look at like the highest growth of new edge deployments, it's actually in Asia. The Asia Pacific region is seeing like 20.6% growth in deployments of edge services, with the Americas being lowest at like 15.4. I mean, they're all growing, but I think it's a level of the maturation of where some of these markets are and where some of these investments and some of these industries are happening.
Yeah, I know one of the big trends over time was standardization in the data center. And Dave, the answer just before that, you talked about standardization and how standardization is kind of being adopted across industries. And if I think through last year, I had two different customers, totally different industries. One was a key champagne producer digitizing their bottling plant with IoT. the other, a fashion company with thousands of retail locations around the world. And I actually think through the actual solution, the micro data center solution that they came to Schneider for, which is the combination of racks and UPS PDUs along with management and monitoring to ensure a resilient foundation for the applications they were deploying. They were almost the exact same. One of them might have had a hardened rack and the other one more of a common IT rack, but all of the base building blocks were identical. And the challenge that the two customers were trying to solve was the same. They were both trying to figure out how to actually leverage digitization. The champagne company wanted to really reduce the number of employees on the bottling plant and increase the efficiency and productivity of that bottling plant. And they were relying now on software automation to do so. And they couldn't really handle downtime. If it went down, they weren't producing champagne that day. And meanwhile, the retail company wanted very similarly. They wanted technology to be part of the customer experience and deliver a wonderful experience. And they couldn't handle downtime because they were afraid of the impacts on the brand image they were relying on that technology to deliver. And so both companies were really in the same position of looking at technologies to have, and the ability for a company like Schneider to drive resiliency across those different industries, geographies, and use cases really becomes a little bit easier, enabling the ability for those companies to justify business cases by not having to go totally customize every single time they decide to try and deploy a new use case.
So I'll tell you, Jamie, that's the secret to scale, right? The only way you reach scale is being able to standardize, I think, the processes and the things that you're doing. And, unfortunately, I think, the trap that you can fall into is making every one of your edge locations look like a snowflake. And if you do, that level of complexity just grows to a point where it actually does cause trouble.
Yeah, I do think Schneider spent a lot of time. You guys have worked with me a lot over the years, a lot of time getting to a place where we have figured out that repeatability model to help drive that consistency. So, Dave, I appreciate that answer, and I do think, as you guys have seen and worked with us over the last few years, Schneider spent a lot of time in trying to build that repeatability into our systems and our solutions to ensure that customers aren't having to build individual snowflakes for each use case. I'm hearing the word sustainability. I know there's lots of initiatives, the Paris Accord, and people commonly ask me, Jamie, sustainability at the edge. It's clear in the data center, but what are you guys seeing or hearing about the word sustainability and how it relates to these highly distributed edge spaces?
Yeah, so absolutely. In our research as well, Jamie, companies, want to do business with other partners who have similar goals for sustainability initiatives. They're looking for ways to improve their use of resources and initially targeting, some of the power hungry aspects of their business and overall looking for ways to improve. I would say that it's probably only our very, top tier organizations that have actually realized at this point, what edge is making up a significant portion of our resource usage. Many companies are still trying to get their arms around what they can do to improve. But I think it's the more advanced companies that are realizing, wait a minute, I need to think of this as the total summation of the parts and look at this in a more holistic way. And I think it will be even more important as potential partners, potential customers, potential employees are looking for more data on actual progress, and transparency will be the real differentiator in the next couple of years.
It's great, the transparency and the information in today's connected world is already there. So the same data that's needed to create resilient infrastructure is the same information that a company would use to deliver on their sustainability goals by actually looking at how much power they're consuming, where it's being consumed. But Dave, can you kind of bring it to a point for us? When we think about edge as an innovation driver, what does that really mean?
Well, I think you hit on one of them. I mean, it depends on the industry that you're in, but when we look at, or maybe you hit on more than one of them, to be honest. I mean, we look at companies looking at the edge as a way of automating operations. think that's one innovation sort of lane that you could be swimming in. Another one is around those, rich customer experiences, being able to bring, data and information better, quicker to users that are there. And then also, of course, like things like new products and services. If you think about, the different challenges that all businesses went through over the last 12 to 18 months, and needing to look at new business models and be quicker around responding to changing business requirements and operating characteristics. Edge has proven to be a way of being more agile, right? And so an agile business, in some respects, sets you up to be more of a resilient business, not just in the infrastructure that you have, but in your ability to react to change. And so it's becoming, not just a kind of nice to have, but really a strategic imperative for a lot of the companies that we talk to.
Great. So in conclusion, for those of you watching, I appreciate the 20 minutes that you've given us today. We talked through a couple of different things. There's clearly some challenges at the edge, especially as people are realizing the edge is a little bit more like the needed resilience of a data center. But those challenges aren't necessarily challenges that can't be overcome. And if overcome, it allows you to leverage the edge as part of your innovation driver to the future, being more agile, being able to reduce risk. And Schneider Electric has invested a lot of time in ensuring that we have solutions, not just our hardware solutions with the Edge micro data center, but the ability to actually manage and monitor with our Edge software and services and really figure out that equation, all while partnering with a company who has very stringent sustainability goals and believes that we have a key role in helping each of our customers drive their sustainability goals in the future. So if you're interested to learn more from Schneider Electric, you can check out our Edge Solutions page at www.apc.com/edge, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.